The glass was halfway to his mouth when time fractured. Ice shifted inside it with a soft, almost polite sound, the kind you only noticed when everything else went quiet. The bartender saw the tilt of the amber liquid, the way it caught the low bar light and threw it back in warped reflections. She saw his fingers tighten slightly around the rim, not in anticipation but in habit. He always paused there, always waited that extra second. That second stretched. Her breath stalled in her chest. Not because she was afraid fear came later, but because something in her body recognized the moment before her mind did. The air felt heavier, as if the room had been sealed. Even the music seemed to hesitate, a note lingering too long before resolving. She moved without deciding to. The note was already in her hand. She didn't remember writing it. She remembered the pen scratching, the paper tearing, the fold made once and only once. Muscle memory, not thought. Survival rarely asked permission. She slid it under the base of the glass as smoothly as she had slid 1,000 coasters before. No eye contact. No apology. Just a whisper of paper against polished wood. Don't drink it. Smile. Leave now. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then his hand dropped. Not to the bar. To her wrist. The grip wasn't violent. That was the first thing she noticed. No jerk, no forceful yank that would draw eyes. Just a sudden, precise closure of fingers around bone and tendon, firm enough that she couldn't pull away without effort, controlled enough that no one else would think twice if they happened to glance over. The glass hovered forgotten, inches from the bar. The room didn't react. Didn't need to. Power didn't announce itself here. It didn't raise its voice or knock things over. It moved quietly, and the room had learned to move with it. Her pulse thudded beneath his thumb. She could feel him register it, the way his grip adjusted minutely, not tightening, just confirming. Alive. Alert. Not panicking. Good then. She didn't look at him right away. That was instinct too. You never rushed into eye contact when someone had chosen control over chaos. You let the moment settle. You let them decide how it would unfold. Ice cracked softly as the glass tilted back down onto the bar. The sound landed louder than it should have, a small betrayal of how tense the air had become. Somewhere behind them, a laugh rose and fell, brittle and wrong, then died out. She swallowed. This was the moment people always imagined differently later. They pictured shouting, or violence, or the kind of confrontation that made sense when retold. It was none of that. It was quiet. His hand remained around her wrist, steady, patient. The kind of patience that had ended conversations, careers, lives without ever being hurried. You slipped, he said. Not loud. Not angry. Just a statement placed between them like another object on the bar. Yes, she replied. One word. Flat. Neither apology nor challenge. The note lay there, innocent and damning at the same time, its edges already darkening slightly from condensation. He hadn't unfolded it yet. He didn't need to. He already knew what it meant. The bartender became acutely aware of everything at once. The faint citrus smell from a recently cut garnish. The stickiness of the bar top where someone had spilled something sweet earlier. The way the mirror behind the shelves reflected the room, giving her a second view of faces that pretended not to see. Micro-questions began stacking in her mind, one after another, each more dangerous than the last. Had anyone else noticed the glass? Had anyone else touched it? Was she wrong? Was she too late? Had she just made herself the problem? His thumb shifted slightly, pressing closer to the place where her pulse jumped. A reminder. Or a test. She lifted her eyes then. His face was calm. That was worse than anger. Calm meant he wasn't reacting. He was processing, sorting possibilities, deciding which ones deserved to live past this moment. You don't do this, he said. I know. You don't interrupt, he continued. You don't warn. You don't assume. I know. Another pause. The silence between his words was deliberate, space to make room for her to fill it if she was foolish enough to try. She wasn't. The glass sat untouched. The audience, if there had been one brave enough to focus, would have thought the danger had passed. Nothing dramatic had happened. No raised voices. No sudden movement. That was the lie of it. This was the knife edge. The place where a night tipped into something else entirely, and no one would know until much later. He finally unfolded the note. The paper made the softest sound, barely audible. His eyes moved across the words without changing expression. When he finished, he refolded it carefully, aligning the edges as if neatness mattered. "Smile," he repeated quietly. She didn't respond. The grip tightened just enough to register. Not pain. Pressure. Ownership of the moment. "Who sent you?" he asked. The question floated there, heavy with consequences. She answered the only way she could. "No one." He studied her face, searching for cracks. There were none he could see. Not because she was unafraid, but because she understood what fear looked like from the outside and knew better than to show it. The ice in the glass shifted again, melting now, reshaping itself around time. The longer it sat, the more inevitable everything felt. Around them, life continued. Someone ordered another drink. Someone checked a phone. Someone opened the door, letting in a rush of cold air that did nothing to break the tension clinging to the bar like a second skin. The audience, if they were listening closely, would feel it then. The sense that the obvious danger wasn't the point. That the drink wasn't the real threat. That the note wasn't a warning so much as a signal. Something had already gone wrong. His hand was still on her wrist. The glass was still full. And the smile he'd worn when he first walked in, easy, practiced, disarming, had not returned. Not yet. The bar had learned how to hold its breath long before the man ever walked in. Did it every night, actually, just in case. The lights were always a little dimmer than necessary, the music a little slower than whatever was popular outside. Glassware clinked softly, never sharply. Laughter rose and fell like it had been trained. Nothing here was an accident. Nothing here ever drew attention to itself unless it was supposed to. When the door opened and he stepped inside, the room didn't freeze. That would have been obvious. Instead, it adjusted. Conversations lowered by half a note. Chairs shifted so legs crossed instead of stretched. The bartender felt it before she saw it, the same way you feel pressure change before a storm breaks. She didn't look up right away. You never looked up right away. He didn't arrive with an entourage. That was the first rule. Men who needed to be seen arrived with noise. Men who already were seen arrived alone. He wore a dark suit that wasn't flashy enough to be new and wasn't worn enough to be careless. No jewelry. No watch. People noticed the absence before they noticed anything else. Absence was a kind of statement. He chose the same stool he always chose, 3 seats from the end. Close enough to the exit to leave without brushing past anyone. Far enough from the corner that he wasn't boxed in. He placed his hand on the bar once, not to get attention, but to confirm that the surface was clean. It was. It always was. Only then did the bartender look up. She had poured thousands of drinks in this room. She had memorized faces without meaning to. This one she didn't need to memorize. He had weight. Not physical weight, he wasn't large, but a kind of gravity that bent behavior around him. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. If something changed, he would feel it. The bartender understood that instinct intimately. It was the same one that had kept her alive for years, sharpened by different circumstances, honed in places she no longer let herself remember too clearly. She nodded once. Not deferential. Not friendly. Neutral. That was the balance. Neutrality was the currency of the bar, and it was expensive. "The usual?" she asked. He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes were calm, which was what unsettled people most. Anger you could predict. Calm meant calculation. He gave the smallest possible nod. She reached for the glass. This was neutral ground. Everyone knew that. Deals happen elsewhere. Arguments ended here. Blood never touched the floor, not because it couldn't, but because it wouldn't. The rules were old, older than the building, older than the neighborhood. They had survived renovations, ownership changes, police raids that somehow never quite found what they were looking for. The rules held because everyone agreed they were useful. The bartender was part of those rules. She wasn't important, and that was precisely why she mattered. She poured the drink the same way she always did. Measured. Clean. No flourish. She slid it across the bar, stopping it exactly where his hand would be when he reached for it. She didn't rush. Rushing made people nervous. Nervous people made mistakes. As the glass settled, she noticed the other man. He was sitting 2 stools away, pretending to be absorbed in his phone. That by itself wasn't strange. What was strange was that he hadn't looked up when the Mafia boss entered. Everyone looked, even if only for a fraction of a second. Even people who tried not to. This man hadn't. His drink was untouched. Condensation gathered at the base of the glass in a way that suggested it had been sitting there too long. The bartender's hand paused for just a beat longer than necessary. She told herself she was imagining it. That was another rule. Never assume danger without proof. Assumptions led to paranoia. Paranoia led to errors. Errors got people noticed. She turned away to wipe the counter, giving herself an excuse to think. Power in this room was quiet. It didn't announce itself. The Mafia boss didn't need to threaten anyone. The threat existed before he arrived and lingered after he left. People didn't fear what he might do in the moment. They feared what would happen later somewhere else, in a way that would never be traced back to this bar or this night. The bartender had learned to read those ripples. A stiff shoulder. A glass set down too carefully. A man who watched reflections instead of faces. She had learned it because once upon a time, in another life she didn't speak about, failing to read those signs had consequences that couldn't be undone. She glanced back at the bar top. The drink she had poured sat untouched in front of the Mafia boss. That wasn't unusual. He never drank immediately. He liked to let people settle, to see who grew uncomfortable with the waiting. Patience was another kind of power. The man with the phone shifted. His hand brushed his glass. Just barely. Enough to move it a fraction of an inch. That was when unease curled low in her stomach. Poison wasn't common. That was a myth people liked to repeat. It was too dramatic, too messy, too unpredictable. But when it did happen, it happened quietly. It looked like coincidence. Like a heart that simply stopped doing its job. The bartender dried her hands slowly. She didn't want to draw attention. Attention was the opposite of safety. She reminded herself of the rules again. Neutral ground. No interference. Observe, serve, forget. Her eyes flicked to the Mafia boss. He was watching her now, not directly, but through the reflection in the mirror behind the bar. He wasn't suspicious. He was aware. There was a difference. Awareness didn't accuse. It catalogued. She returned his gaze in the mirror for half a second, then looked away. That was acceptable. Anything longer would have been interpreted as something else. The bar hummed around them. A laugh broke out near the back. Someone dropped a napkin. Life continued, and that, oddly, made everything feel sharper. Danger rarely arrived with warning music. It arrived dressed as normalcy. The bartender reached for a clean cloth and wiped a non-existent spill. Her mind replayed details she hadn't realized she'd stored. The way the other man's fingers avoided the rim of his glass. The way he held his phone at an angle that reflected the bar instead of the screen. The faint chemical note that didn't belong beneath the alcohol's scent. She swallowed. Interfering was not her job. It had never been her job. The bar kept her safe precisely because she did not choose sides. People trusted her because she was invisible. But invisibility had limits. She thought of the last time she'd ignored a feeling like this. How afterward everyone had said there was nothing she could have done. How that had been true. And yet somehow not enough to make the memory loosen its grip. The Mafia boss lifted his glass at last. Just an inch off the bar. Not enough to drink. Enough to test weight, to feel resistance. The bartender's breath caught before she could stop it. She disguised it as a sigh and turned her back, pretending to reach for bottles she didn't need. Behind her the glass hovered. This was the moment. She knew it with a clarity that made her hands steady even as her chest tightened. If something was wrong, it would become irreversible in seconds. If she acted, she would be noticed. Not just by him, but by everyone who understood the rules of this place. She told herself she might be wrong. That she probably was wrong. That certainty was rare and she did not have it. But certainty had never been the only thing worth acting on. She reached beneath the bar, not for a weapon or an alarm, but for a pen. The act felt absurdly small. Her fingers trembled as she tore a scrap of paper from the receipt roll. She kept her head down, her body angled away from him, every movement deliberate and ordinary. She wrote quickly, not because she was panicking, but because the words had already formed in her mind. Don't drink it. Smile. Leave now. She folded the paper once. No more. Anything more would be conspicuous. Her heart hammered as she straightened and turned back toward the bar. The Mafia boss still held the glass, still not drinking. His eyes flicked to her hands. She kept them steady. She slid a coaster closer to him, letting the folded paper fall against the base of the glass as if by accident. She did not look at his face. For half a second nothing happened. Then his fingers tightened. He read the note without unfolding it fully, eyes moving just enough to register the words. The smile that had rested there out of habit did not fade. Instead, it froze like a photograph taken a moment too late. The bartender felt the shift ripple outward, subtle but unmistakable. The room hadn't noticed yet. It would. Power always announced itself eventually. She straightened, ready to step back, to retreat into neutrality again, to pretend this moment had never existed. His hand shot out and closed around her wrist. It wasn't violent. That was what made it terrifying. His grip was firm, precise, exactly strong enough to ensure she couldn't pull away without making a scene. His glass hovered inches from the bar, forgotten. The bartender met his eyes for the first time that night. They were calm. And in that calm she understood something with sudden, chilling clarity. This moment mattered not because she had broken the rules, but because the rules themselves were about to change. Time slowed in the way it only ever did when something irreversible was approaching. The bartender felt his fingers around her wrist, warm and deliberate, not squeezing yet, just present. A reminder. The bar noise softened at the edges of her hearing, like someone had wrapped the room in felt. She could still hear glasses clink, still hear a laugh from the back, but all of it felt far away, secondary, unreal. The only thing that mattered was the space between his hand and her pulse. Then, just as suddenly, he released her. Not abruptly. Not with a shove. He let go as if he had never intended to hold her at all. His hand returned to the bar. The glass settled back down without a sound. She didn't move. That was the first test. People always thought the danger was in the grab, but it wasn't. The danger was in what happened after, when you revealed whether you understood the rules of survival or not. She didn't yank her hand back. She didn't rub her wrist. She didn't apologize. She let her arm rest naturally at her side, as if nothing had happened. Only then did she breathe. He turned the folded paper between two fingers, slow enough that anyone watching would think he was simply idling. His eyes never left her face. Not accusing. Assessing. "You slipped," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she replied. One word. Neutral. No explanation offered. Explanations were admissions. Admissions invited scrutiny. For a moment she thought that might be the end of it. That he would finish his drink or leave or say something that would snap the night back into its usual shape. That was the false safety. The brief, dangerous hope that you'd misread the moment and escaped consequence. He smiled. It was small, polite, the kind of smile people used when they wanted to reassure someone else. He unfolded the paper fully now, smoothing it with care. Anyone glancing over would see nothing but a man reading a receipt. "Smile and leave," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Her stomach tightened. He hadn't reacted the way she'd imagined. There was no anger, no suspicion voiced aloud. That was worse. Men like him didn't waste energy on emotions until they had exhausted information. She busied herself with the bar, wiping down a spot that didn't need it, refilling a bowl of olives that was still half full. Movement gave her hands something to do, and gave him the illusion of normalcy. Normalcy was camouflage. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched the other man again. The one with the phone. He hadn't looked up yet. His glass remained untouched. The longer it sat, the more wrong it felt. Alcohol sweated onto the bar in a slow ring, spreading outward like a stain. The bartender's mind worked through possibilities with ruthless efficiency. Poison could be in the glass. Could be on the rim. It could be something slower, something that wouldn't show until later, long after this room had been cleaned and forgotten. The method mattered less than the intent. Someone wanted something to happen tonight. She had seen that kind of patience before. The Mafia boss lifted the glass again, higher this time. Enough that the light caught the liquid, amber and deceptively clean. He tilted it slightly, watching how it clung to the sides. His smile didn't waver. Her chest tightened. This was the moment she'd been circling for minutes now. the one she couldn't step away from. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to fade back into the background, to let the rules protect her the way they always had. Interfering once was dangerous. Interfering twice was suicide. She forced herself to breathe evenly. "Everything all right?" she asked, pitching her voice just loud enough to be overheard if anyone was listening. He glanced around the room, then back at her. "Perfect," he said. Another false safety. Another opening that could be misread as permission. She moved down the bar to serve another customer, putting physical distance between herself and the glass. If she stayed close, she would be implicated in whatever happened next. If she left, she might be able to convince herself she'd done all she could. She poured a beer. She took payment. She smiled at a joke she didn't hear. Behind her, the glass remained raised. The seconds stretched. 10, 15, 20. No one else noticed. No one else needed to. Power insulated itself. It created pockets where time behaved differently. She remembered unbidden another bar, another lifetime. Different city. Different name. A man who hadn't waited long enough before drinking. The way everyone afterward had insisted it was unavoidable, that no one could have known. She had known then too. She had done nothing. Her fingers tightened around the bottle she was holding. She set it down carefully, afraid it might shatter if she didn't. The Mafia boss lowered the glass slightly, as if reconsidering. His eyes flicked once, just once, toward the man with the phone. That was new. That was a change. The bartender felt a flicker of grim relief. He had noticed something. Not necessarily what she had noticed, but enough. She took a step back toward him, slow and unhurried. Close enough to intervene again if she had to. Close enough that he could stop her if he chose to. He leaned closer to the bar, his voice still low. "Why?" he asked. There it was. Not who sent you. Not what is this. Why? She chose her words with care. "Because sometimes," she said, "people forget what patience looks like." His smile sharpened just a fraction. "You're implying I'm being tested." She didn't answer. Silence could be agreement or ignorance, depending on how it was read. She let him decide which suited him better. He studied her face again, longer this time. Not just her expression, but the lines around her eyes, the way she held her shoulders, the stillness in her stance. He was reading her history the way he read rooms, looking for tells that betrayed experience. "You've seen this before," he said. It wasn't a question. Her heart thudded once, hard enough that she was glad his hand wasn't still on her wrist. She shrugged lightly. "People drink," she said. "Sometimes they shouldn't." Another half-truth. The safest kind. The glass hovered again, suspended between intention and outcome. The room felt like it was leaning forward now, even if no one else sensed it consciously. The music ended and restarted on a new track. The door opened briefly, letting in a rush of cold air, and a pair of unfamiliar faces that quickly decided to sit far away. The Mafia boss inhaled, bringing the glass closer to his lips. His eyes never left hers. This was the breaking point. The moment where anticipation either collapsed into action or diffused into nothing. She could feel it tightening around her, compressing every possibility into a single narrowing path. She thought about stepping back. About pretending she'd misunderstood everything. About letting the night take its course and dealing with the aftermath the way everyone always did. She didn't move. The man with the phone shifted at last. He glanced up quick and sharp, then back down. His fingers tapped once against the screen. That was it. That was the tell. Too deliberate. Too rehearsed. The bartender spoke before she could second-guess herself. "You don't usually drink this late," she said, pitching it as casual observation. The Mafia boss paused. His eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. Back to her. Back to the glass. "No," he agreed. "I don't." Another silence. He lowered the glass fully now, setting it back on the bar. Ice clinked softly. The sound echoed in her chest like a held breath finally released. Relief surged through her, sharp and dizzying. It was premature. She knew that even as it washed over her, moments like this were never endings. They were transitions. He picked up the folded note again, tapping it lightly against the bar. "Smile," he repeated. He smiled wider, for the benefit of anyone who might be watching. It was charming. Disarming. The smile of a man enjoying his evening. Then slowly, deliberately it vanished. Not replaced by anger. Not replaced by suspicion. Just gone. The absence of it was louder than any shout. And the bartender understood, with a cold certainty that settled deep in her bones, that whatever she had just set in motion was far bigger than a single drink, and there would be no leaving this night behind untouched. The absence of his smile changed the air more than the grab ever had. It wasn't dramatic. No one gasped. No chairs scraped back. But something essential withdrew from the room, like warmth pulled out through a crack in the wall. The bartender felt it immediately. She had lived long enough knowing that when powerful people stopped pretending, reality sharpened. He didn't look angry. That was the mistake everyone made. They expected anger to announce danger. Anger was loud. Anger burned energy. He conserved his. He turned the glass slowly, fingertips brushing the condensation ring it had left on the bar. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't acknowledge it. He let it exist, a quiet marker of what had almost happened. You noticed something, he said. Not a question. A placement of a piece on the board. Yes, she said. Another piece placed. He watched her hands. People always watched hands first. They told the truth faster than mouths did. Hers were steady now. Not relaxed. Steady. That mattered. You noticed something, he repeated. And instead of forgetting it, you decided to involve yourself. She tilted her head slightly. A neutral gesture. Curious, not defensive. I poured the drink, she said. That makes it my responsibility. He almost laughed at that. Almost. The sound didn't leave his throat, but she saw it register. A flicker of amusement at the edges of his eyes. Responsibility, he said softly, is a flexible concept. I know. That earned her a longer look. Not suspicious. Interested. The man with the phone was very still now. Too still. He had stopped pretending to scroll. His screen had gone dark. His reflection in the mirror behind the bar was sharp, focused, alert. He knew something had shifted, even if he didn't yet know how badly. The Mafia boss leaned forward, forearms resting on the bar. He closed the distance between himself and the bartender deliberately, forcing her to decide whether to retreat. She didn't. You didn't spill it, he said. You didn't warn my men. You didn't call attention to it. You slipped me a note. Yes. Why? There it was again. Why? He wasn't interested in mechanics. He was interested in motive. Because anything louder would have put us both in a corner, she said. And you think I avoid corners? I think, she said carefully, that you prefer choosing them yourself. That one landed. She felt it in the subtle shift of his posture, the way his shoulders relaxed a fraction. Respect, she realized, didn't come from fear. Came from accuracy. He reached out again, slower this time, and took her wrist once more. Not to restrain her. To feel her pulse. She didn't pull away. Her heart was beating faster now, but not erratically. He felt that too. He was reading her the way he read ledgers, the way he read men who sat across from him thinking they were prepared. Fear, he said, almost conversationally, is useful. Panic is not. I'm not panicking, she replied. No, he agreed. You're calculating. His thumb pressed lightly against her pulse point. Not enough to hurt. Enough to remind her that he could. Her skin prickled, but she kept her gaze level. You know, he continued, that interfering once is a mistake. Interfering twice is a declaration. She met his eyes. I'm aware. Then say it. Say what? He leaned closer. What you think this makes you. The bar seemed to recede even further, sound draining away until the space between them felt sealed off. She was acutely aware of how visible this moment might become if anyone chose to look directly at them. How invisible it still was because no one dared. A liability, she said. That was the correct answer. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. Liabilities, he said, are removed. Yes. And yet, he went on, you're still standing here. She allowed herself the smallest shrug. You haven't decided what I am yet. Silence stretched. He released her wrist again, as if satisfied with the measure he'd taken. He reached for the glass, then stopped, fingers hovering just above it. His attention shifted, sharp and sudden, to the man with the phone. The bartender followed his gaze. The man finally looked up fully now. His eyes met the Mafia boss's, and for a fraction of a second, something unguarded flashed across his face. Recognition. Calculation. Fear. He recovered quickly, lifting his glass as if in casual salute. The Mafia boss didn't respond. Instead, he said very quietly, "You're not the target." The words hit her like cold water. She didn't react outwardly. Inwardly, everything rearranged itself. Not the target. That meant the poison, if there was poison, wasn't meant for him. Or at least not primarily. It meant the danger was indirect, layered, designed to trigger something else. Her mind raced through implications with renewed urgency. "Then who is?" she asked. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because answers were leverage and he hadn't decided how much to give her. He picked up the glass at last. The room seemed to hold its breath again. He didn't drink. He raised it just enough to catch the light, studying the liquid as if it might confess something under scrutiny. "You understand," he said, "what it costs to be wrong." "Yes. And you understand," he continued, "what it costs to be right." She swallowed. Usually more. That earned her another look. Longer. Deeper. "You're not from here," he said suddenly. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an accusation. It was an observation drawn from 1,000 tiny details she'd forgotten she was giving away. "No," she said. "You didn't grow up behind this bar." "No. Where then?" There it was. The first real probe. The kind that didn't sound dangerous until you realized what it could lead to. She chose a truth that was incomplete but solid enough to stand on. Somewhere rules were louder. He considered that. His gaze flicked again to the man with the phone, who was now watching openly, tension coiled tight beneath his stillness. "Loud rules," the Mafia boss said, "are for people who don't trust silence." She didn't reply. Silence was safer here. He set the glass down decisively, pushing it a few inches away from himself. A clear statement. The bartender felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Whatever game was unfolding, it had advanced to its next phase. "You noticed before anyone else," he said. "That tells me two things." She waited. "First," he continued, "you pay attention." She inclined her head slightly. "Second," he said, "you've seen this kind of thing before." Her jaw tightened just enough that he would catch it. "That wasn't an answer," she said. "No," he agreed. "It was a test. And you passed." The man with the phone stood abruptly, chair legs scraping against the floor. The sound cut through the bar like a blade. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. The Mafia boss didn't move. He didn't look at the man. He didn't need to. "Sit," he said. The word wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It carried weight, density, inevitability. The man hesitated. Just a beat too long. Then he sat. The bartender felt the shift again. Heavier this time. The night was no longer balanced on the edge of possibility. It had tipped. "You," the Mafia boss said to her, "will finish your shift." Her brows lifted almost imperceptibly. "You will serve drinks," he continued. "You will clean the bar. You will act as though nothing unusual has occurred." "And afterward?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Afterward is a different conversation. Another piece placed. Another threat implied without being spoken." He rose from his stool at last, straightening his jacket with meticulous care. The room seemed to exhale as he stood, tension redistributing itself now that the gravitational center had shifted. He leaned in close to her once more, his voice pitched so low that only she could hear. "If you're wrong," he said, "this ends badly for you. I know. If you're right," he continued, "this ends badly for someone else." She met his gaze. "It already has." For a moment, something like approval flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar calm that had made him untouchable for so long. He turned away, leaving the glass behind untouched. As he walked toward the door, the bartender realized her hands were trembling now. Not with fear exactly, but with the delayed release of adrenaline. She gripped the edge of the bar until it passed. Behind her, The man with the phone stared at his drink as if it might explode. The bartender resumed wiping the counter, movements automatic, precise. To anyone watching, she was just doing her job. But inside, everything had changed. Power had shifted. Lines had been crossed. And somewhere between the note and the grab and the words that followed, she had stepped back into a world she had sworn she'd left behind. One where silence was currency and attention was lethal. The fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest. But beneath it now was something else. Fascination. And, dangerously, the faintest spark of respect. The door closed behind him without ceremony, and for a few seconds afterward the bar felt unanchored, like something essential had stepped out and taken its gravity with it. People exhaled in small, unconscious ways. Someone laughed a little too loudly, then stopped. Music continued to play, but it felt thinner now, stretched over a room that had just learned how close it had come to something it didn't understand. The bartender stayed where she was, hands moving automatically, polishing a glass that was already clean. She did not look at the untouched drink. Not yet. She waited until the rhythm of the room reasserted itself. Until orders resumed. Until the illusion of normalcy stitched itself back together just enough to pass for real. Only then did she allow herself to glance at the glass again. It sat exactly where he had left it. The ice had melted slightly, blunting the sharp edges that had caught the light earlier. Condensation had spread farther now, a pale ring like a watermark of intent. If there was poison, it was patient. If there wasn't, the glass still represented something far more dangerous than alcohol. She leaned closer and breathed in, subtle, controlled. The smell was faint, almost imperceptible, masked beneath the sweetness of the liquor. She wouldn't have noticed it if she hadn't already known what to look for. She closed her eyes for half a second. So it was that kind of night. The man with the phone was still there. He hadn't left. That alone was confirmation. Anyone innocent would have taken the exit as soon as the Mafia boss did, grateful to escape the residual tension. This man stayed rigid, eyes darting too often toward the door, as if waiting for someone who hadn't arrived yet. The bartender turned her back to him and reached beneath the bar. She retrieved a clean cloth and wiped the spill she had ignored earlier. Her movements were calm, but her thoughts were racing now, assembling pieces that no longer fit the story she'd first assumed. This hadn't been an attempt on the Mafia boss's life. Not directly. She had made that mistake at first because it was the obvious one. Poison drink, powerful man, clean removal. That was how people told stories about power. Reality was messier, smarter. This was a test. She recognized the method now that she allowed herself to see it fully. A compound that wouldn't kill immediately. Something that would leave traces just distinctive enough to be identified later, if you knew where to look. Something that said, unmistakably, I was here. I can reach you. Loyalty tests weren't about eliminating enemies. They were about identifying assets. They fleshed out reactions. Who panicked? Who covered? Who knew too much? Who knew nothing at all? If he had drunk it, nothing might have happened tonight. Or something subtle. A delay. A symptom easily dismissed. But the real result would come later, when the aftermath revealed who moved and who stayed still. She felt cold. The Mafia boss had noticed something off, yes, but not all of it. Not yet. And that meant whoever had orchestrated this had already accounted for his instincts, which meant the betrayal was already in motion. She set the cloth aside and reached for another glass, this one for a regular who always ordered the same thing and never stayed long. Familiarity was grounding. It gave her something solid to hold on to while her mind mapped out implications she didn't like. She had been right to warn him not to drink, but that wasn't what she'd actually done. She had warned him that he was being watched from closer than he realized. The realization settled heavy in her chest. He was losing control. Quietly. Invisibly. The worst way someone like him could. A voice broke through her thoughts. Another, the man with the phone said, holding up his glass at last. Her eyes lifted to him. She took in his face properly now, cataloging details she'd avoided earlier. Early 40s maybe. Too neat. Too contained. The kind of man who liked order because disorder made him sloppy. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had. Of course, she said. She took the glass from him. He let go reluctantly, fingers lingering just a fraction too long. When she turned away, she could feel his gaze following her, measuring. She did not poison his drink. She poured it clean. Deliberately. She wanted him to understand something had shifted. Tess worked both ways. As she slid the glass back to him, she leaned in just enough that her voice wouldn't carry. "You're early," she said. His brow furrowed. "For what?" "For whatever you're waiting on." A flicker of irritation crossed his face before he smoothed it away. "I'm just enjoying the night." She smiled politely. "Careful. Nights like this have a way of lasting longer than people expect." She straightened and moved away before he could respond. The message had been delivered. Whether he understood it or not was secondary. He would now behave differently. People always did once they realized they'd been noticed. Behind the bar, her hands kept moving. Glasses. Bottles. Receipts. The mechanics of the job gave her cover while her mind slipped backward, to the part of her life she rarely visited anymore. She had seen this poison before. Not this exact compound, but its signature. The philosophy behind it. It belonged to a school of thinking that favored leverage over spectacle, patience over force. Men who used it believed the cleanest kill was the one that didn't look like a kill at all. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Back then she hadn't been a bartender. She'd been adjacent to people who thought they were untouchable until they weren't. She had watched alliances rot from the inside. Watched powerful figures choke not on poison but on misplaced trust. She had learned to read rooms because rooms told the truth long before people did. She had left that world because it demanded too much vigilance. Because it punished hesitation and punished certainty even harder. She had traded influence for anonymity, danger for routine. And now somehow it had found her again. The door opened briefly. 2 men entered, scanned the room, then took seats near the back. Not regulars. They ordered drinks they didn't really want and kept their eyes on the exit. That confirmed it. Whatever was unfolding hadn't ended with the Mafia boss's departure. It had only changed shape. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. She knew who it would be. Or at least what it would be about. He wouldn't call yet. That wasn't his style. He would wait. Let the night finish playing out. Let information come to him instead of chasing it. He would be thinking now. Replaying details. Re-examining assumptions. Wondering why she had acted the way she did. And what that revealed about things he hadn't yet seen. The bartender finished her shift without incident. No fights. No sudden departures. The man with the phone left eventually, stiff and watchful, slipping out into the night without meeting her eyes. The 2 men in the back followed soon after. The bar emptied gradually, returning to its familiar, hollow quiet. When the last customer was gone and the lights were turned down, she poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Only then did she allow the tension to drain from her shoulders. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "Yes," she said, before the voice on the other end could speak. There was a pause. Then his voice, calm as ever. "You didn't save me." "No," she replied. "I didn't." "You warned me." "Yes." "Of what?" She looked at the untouched glass one last time before dumping its contents into the sink. The liquid disappeared without drama, swallowed by the drain like it had never existed. "Of the part you missed," she said. Another pause. Longer this time. "You're suggesting," he said slowly, "that this wasn't about me." "I'm suggesting," she corrected, "that it was about who you trust." Silence. She could almost hear him nodding, not in agreement but in recognition. This was the kind of information he valued most. The kind that hurt. "Someone close," he said. "Yes. And you knew." "I suspected. Before tonight." She hesitated. "Just long enough. Before the drink." He exhaled softly. Not frustration. Focus. "You should have left," he said. "I tried," she replied. A faint smile touched his voice. "No. You didn't." She didn't argue. He was right. Some part of her had chosen this the moment she'd noticed the glass wasn't right. Some part of her had been waiting for a reason to step back into the kind of clarity danger brought. "This changes things," he said. "It already has." Another silence. This one felt heavier, edged with something like dread. "They're moving without me," he said at last. "Yes. And they think I won't notice until it's too late." Yes. He laughed quietly. Not amused. Impressed. They've miscalculated. Maybe, she said. But not in the way you think. That gave him pause. You're not behind, she continued. But you're no longer ahead. Not tonight. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. Sharper. You've put yourself in the middle of this. She closed her eyes. I was already there. Another beat. You understand, he said. What that means? Yes. You'll hear from me again. I know. The call ended. She stood alone behind the bar, the quiet now complete, the room stripped of pretense. The realization settled fully then, undeniable and heavy. This night wasn't a near miss. It was a signal. A declaration that the balance she had relied on no longer existed. She hadn't saved a powerful man. She had exposed a fracture in the world he controlled. And whatever came next would not be contained to a single glass, a single note or a single night. The second time he came back, the bar was quieter than usual. Not empty. Just subdued, like it knew better than to be loud when something unresolved was still hanging in the air. The bartender noticed the change the moment she unlocked the door that evening. The stools were in the same places, the bottles arranged with the same precision, but the room felt expectant in a way that made her chest tighten. She didn't need to look at the door to know when he arrived. She felt it instead. That familiar pressure, heavier now, threaded with something new. Not uncertainty. Not fear. Restraint. He took his usual seat. 3 stools from the end. Same posture. Same measured stillness. But this time he didn't speak. She poured water first. Not the usual drink. Just water. She set it in front of him without comment. He watched her do it. You didn't have to come back, she said. I know. That answer told her everything. He hadn't come because he needed confirmation. He'd come because he needed proximity. Control demanded closeness. She turned away to tend to another customer, giving him time to settle into the room again. When she returned, he hadn't touched the water. You didn't leave, he said. No. You could have. Yes. Another pause. They were careful with silence now. It had become a language of its own. You disrupted a process, he said at last. I noticed one. Same thing, he replied. She shook her head slightly. Not to the people who survive it. That earned her a look sharper than any glare. Not anger. Recognition again. The kind that came when someone named a truth you preferred to leave unspoken. You know what loyalty tests are for, he said. Yes. To remind people where power lies. To remind people where danger lives, she corrected. His fingers tightened around the glass of water. Not enough to crack it. Enough to show restraint had limits. You think I don't understand that? He asked. I think, she said slowly, that you've been using the same language for so long you didn't hear it change. That landed harder than she expected. She felt it reverberate in the stillness between them. He leaned back slightly, creating distance instead of closing it. A subtle shift. Defensive, not aggressive. You warned me, he said. Not because you were afraid for me. No. Not because you wanted favor. No. Then why? There it was again. Why? But this time it wasn't a probe. It was an admission. He was circling something he couldn't quite bring himself to name. She rested her hands on the bar. Felt the cool wood beneath her palms. Grounded herself. Because I know what it looks like, she said. When people start making plans that don't include you. His jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt her. That was new. They stop checking your reactions, she continued. They assume your patterns won't change. They test the edges instead of the center. You think I'm predictable, he said. I think you've earned your habits, she replied. And that's what makes them dangerous. The bar around them seemed to recede again, as if the world had narrowed to this exchange alone. He reached out without warning and took her wrist. Not hard. Not gentle. Intentional. Her breath caught despite herself. Not because of pain but because of memory. Because her body remembered what this grip meant in other contexts, other lives. She didn't pull away. This, he said quietly, is where most people start apologizing. I'm not most people, she said. His thumb brushed her pulse point again. slower this time, almost contemplative. You could be, he said, if you wanted. The offer hung there, heavy and unspoken. Safety in exchange for silence. Protection in exchange for alignment. Control disguised as care. She swallowed. This was the fracture. The place she'd been avoiding. The moment where neutrality finally collapsed. I don't want what you're offering, she said. Everyone wants something. I want to leave this place, she said. At the end of the night. Alive. Unowned. That did it. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not fury. Not offense. Something closer to loss. You think ownership is the same as protection, he said. I think protection that can be revoked isn't protection, she replied. His grip tightened just slightly. Enough to remind her of the imbalance between them. Enough to test whether she would flinch. She didn't. I know what you are, she continued, her voice steady even as her heart hammered. And I know what this costs you. The constant vigilance. The never knowing whether the person closest to you is loyal or simply patient. Silence stretched long enough that she wondered if she'd gone too far. You shouldn't know that, he said finally. No, she agreed. I shouldn't. His grip loosened. Slowly. Deliberately. Until her wrist was free. The release felt louder than the grab ever had. Like a decision made without ceremony. For a moment, neither of them moved. That's the thing you missed, she said softly. Not the poison. The timing. They weren't testing whether you'd die. They were testing whether you'd notice you were being tested. He stared at his own hand, as if surprised to find it empty. And you noticed, she continued. But not soon enough to stop the next move. He looked up at her then. Really looked. Not as a bartender. Not as a liability. As someone who had seen through the machinery he'd built his life around. You didn't save me, he said again. No. You didn't even protect me. No. She held his gaze. I respected you enough to tell you the truth. That was the line. It landed heavy, irrevocable, the kind of sentence that rearranged how a moment would be remembered. She knew it as soon as she said it. She could almost hear it echoing later, stripped of context, repeated by people who would never understand the cost of speaking it aloud. He closed his eyes briefly. Just a second. But it was enough. She saw the weight settle on him, the recognition of how close control always was to illusion. When he opened them again, the calm was back. But it was different now. Thinner. Sharper around the edges. You've made yourself visible, he said. Yes. You understand what visibility invites. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes. Another pause. This one felt final. You won't be punished for this, he said at last. She exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding her breath. But, he continued, you won't be untouched by it either. I wouldn't expect to be. He stood. Adjusted his jacket. The ritual remained intact. Even if the meaning had shifted. As he turned to leave, he stopped and looked back at her one last time. Next time, he said. Tell me sooner. She met his eyes. Next time, she replied. Listen faster. For a long moment they held each other's gaze, the space between them dense with things neither would ever say out loud. Then he nodded once. And walked out. The bar felt heavier after he left. Not tense. Weighted. Like gravity had increased by a fraction and everything would take more effort now. She flexed her wrist, feeling the echo of his grip linger there. Not pain. Memory. Trust had not been offered. Control had not been surrendered. But something had shifted all the same. And she knew with a quiet certainty that settled deep in her chest, that whatever came next would demand more from both of them than either was ready to give. The consequences did not arrive with noise. They never did. They arrived folded into routine, disguised as order restoring itself, carried on the backs of people who believed the worst was already over. The bartender understood that before the first chair was flipped onto a table, before the lights dimmed at the end of another night, before the city outside resumed pretending it wasn't built on quieter violences. The ruin test came first. It was subtle. A recalibration rather than a purge. Meetings postponed without explanation. Calls unanswered longer than usual. Men who were normally summoned found themselves waiting. Men who were never summoned were asked to sit in rooms they didn't recognize, with no clocks and no windows. The Mafia boss did not move immediately. That was the part no one understood. Those who had engineered the test expected retaliation within hours. That was how power usually responded when challenged: fast, loud, reassuringly brutal. Instead, there was nothing. Silence stretched. Doubt crept in. People began to wonder whether the poison had been noticed at all, whether the signal they had sent had been too subtle, too clever by half. Impatience followed. Impatience always betrayed itself. The bartender heard pieces of it over the next few weeks. Not directly. Never directly. Fragments slipped through the bar the way smoke slipped under doors. A regular who stopped coming without explanation. A supplier who paid in cash when he never had before. A man who drank more than usual and spoke less. She listened. She always had. The Mafia boss did not come back for some time. That too was deliberate. Absence was a message. It forced people to fill the space with their own assumptions, and assumptions were easier to exploit than facts. When he did move, it wasn't against the man with the phone. That would have been expected. Instead, a different man disappeared. Someone peripheral. Someone unremarkable. Someone whose loyalty had never been questioned because he had never been important enough to matter. His execution, if it could be called that, didn't happen in the open. There was no body. No warning. Just a gap where a name used to be, and a quiet understanding that the gap itself was the point. The bartender never learned exactly how it happened. She didn't need to. The delayed revenge unfolded like a chain reaction. One removal destabilized another relationship. One silence prompted another confession. Pressure was applied not where it was obvious but where it would echo. By the time the man with the phone realized what was happening, it was already too late. He wasn't confronted. He wasn't accused. He was simply excluded. Cut off from information he had grown accustomed to receiving. Left in rooms where no one asked his opinion. He mistook this at first for punishment. He didn't realize it was an invitation to make a mistake. He made several. The final one happened somewhere far from the bar, in a place with no witnesses who mattered. The bartender would never know the specifics, only the outcome. One morning his name stopped circulating. His accounts went quiet. His phone rang unanswered. The Mafia boss did not attend whatever passed for his end. That was another rule. The bartender felt the shift fully then, the way a city feels different after a storm has passed and taken something essential with it. Power had reasserted itself, but it was leaner now. More suspicious. Less forgiving. She remained behind the bar. That surprised people. Some expected her to disappear. Others expected her to rise. Both misunderstandings were dangerous. She did neither. She stayed exactly where she was, which turned out to be the most unsettling choice of all. The Mafia boss returned eventually. Not dramatically. Not even noticeably. He took his usual stool. 3 from the end. He ordered water again. She served it without comment. They did not speak of what had happened. They didn't need to. What passed between them now was different. The tension had not vanished, but it had changed character. It no longer crackled. It pressed. Dense. Permanent. "You could leave," he said once months later, as casually as if commenting on the weather. "I know," she replied. "You should." She met his eyes. "I won't." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. That was not permission. It was acknowledgement. The new rule took shape quietly. No tests conducted in neutral ground. No loyalty proven through collateral risk. No assumptions made about who was watching. The rule was never announced. Didn't need to be. It spread the way rules always did in his world, through absence, through pattern, through the sudden understanding that certain behaviors no longer produce the expected results. The bartender became part of that pattern. People noticed she was left alone. That no one pressured her. That she was not questioned, not recruited, not removed. They noticed that those who tried to use her as a conduit found doors closing elsewhere. She was not protected. She was respected. That distinction mattered. Came with a cost. She slept less easily now. She noticed exits automatically again. She caught herself reading reflections, tracking movements, calculating outcomes she once would have ignored. The past she had kept sealed off had reopened, Not violently, but thoroughly. There were nights when she considered walking away, packing up, letting anonymity reclaim her. There were nights when she stayed because she understood something she hadn't before. Neutrality was not the absence of power. It was a position that required constant defense. The Mafia boss never thanked her. He never apologized. He never explained. What he did do once was leave a note beneath his empty glass. It was folded once. No more. She unfolded it after he left. It read, "The rules changed. Pay attention." She burned it in the sink and washed the ashes down the drain. The future cost made itself known slowly. She would never again be invisible. Not truly. She had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. Even if she left, even if she vanished, she would always be someone who had seen too much and chosen to speak anyway. That knowledge would follow her. It would protect her, and it would endanger her depending on who was looking. On her last shift before a rare night off, she wiped down the bar and glanced at the spot where the poisoned drink had once sat. There was no mark there now. No stain. Nothing to indicate how close the room had come to becoming something else entirely. That was how it always was. Moments that changed everything rarely left evidence. As she turned out the lights and locked the door behind her, she felt the weight of the new rules settle into place, solid and unyielding. Silence was still currency. Attention was still lethal. And survival, she understood now, wasn't about staying out of the game. It was about knowing when the game had already found you.